A week ago on Constitutional Radio, KMET 1490 AM, Douglas V. Gibbs, myself, I'm the host of that program, and I went through a story on the radio show. I decided I wanted to share also with my YouTube audience because I wanted people to understand how important it is to be involved and active and how easy it is to pretend something is not happening when it is. And so I recount a story that I write about in my book, Silenced Screams, and it comes from a film that I saw at a pro-life event years ago. It's about a story called Sing a Little Louder. And without giving you too much about it, here you go. Here's my presentation of Sing a Little Louder on Constitutional Radio, KMET 1490 AM. I remember watching when I was a young man an after-school special that was called The Wave. And it was a movie that showed how easily fascism, totalitarianism, the mindless citizen willing to follow tyranny, how easily that could happen here in America. The premise of the show was a history teacher was discussing what had happened in Nazi Germany. How the good Germans fell so easily for such a horrible agenda, for a totalitarian system that was slaughtering people. How could that happen so easily? How could the Germans not even realize that the Holocaust was going on and fall for the Nazi regime? Vote them into office, support them, fight for them. How could all that happen? They believed they were doing the right thing. They believed they were being good Germans. They were just following what they were being told. The Jews and the communists and the capitalists were all enemies, and therefore they needed to be eradicated, controlled, for the sake of a good German society. Because Germany was suffering because of these people, they were told. Besides, they didn't want to get in trouble with the law anyway. And I tell this story about a German church in my book, the Silenced Screams, my book about abortion. And it's a story about how during the church service, the little boy who had to go to church with his mom every week, he was bored, like most kids are, in the main sanctuary. And how one of the ways he kept himself sane during the Sunday morning service was there was a train that would go by along the railroad tracks just outside the church at the same time every day. And he had a pocket watch, and he watched that pocket watch. He was watching for the one day that that train would be off by a minute or so. But every Sunday, at the exact proper time, when the stopwatch clicked at a certain time, that train would come by. It was always on time. But the boy, every Sunday, still pulled out the pocket watch, and every Sunday he listened for that train, expecting it one time. One day, someday, it may be a little earlier, a little late. He didn't know which, but surely there would be a Sunday where that train, which went by the church there in Germany in the early 40s, would not be on time. And finally, that Sunday came. And the clock in the boy's hand, that stopwatch or that pocket watch, clicked to the certain time that the train would normally come by, but the boy could not hear the train. The whistle was not blowing. The tracks were not rumbling. The far distant rumble of the train did not come to be at the time that it would normally happen. And the boy held that pocket watch, and he watched that pocket watch as the time passed. Tick, 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 tick. And the train had not come. And then finally, after a few minutes had passed, in the distance, the boy could hear that old familiar rumble. He could feel the ground began to slightly shudder. That all familiar whistle finally in the distance. The train was finally arriving. But it was late. And it was minutes, many minutes late. The boy was very curious. After all this time, all these Sundays, the train that was always on time, this one day was late. And not just late by seconds or even a minute or two, but many minutes. Why was this train so late? And the boy's imagination ran wild. Did they have to stop because of a dead animal on the tracks? Did it take longer at the last station for people to get on or off the train? Was it a cargo train? It took longer to load it. Did they have to go slower around a certain curve than they normally would because of weather? He didn't know. But he did know that train was late. And it wasn't just sort of late, it was a lot of late. And the train rumbled down the tracks. And it got closer. And it got closer. And the rumbling got louder. As it always did when that train went by the church. The tracks, after all, were at the end of the walkway in front of the church. Mere yards. And the train came rumbling up, and then it did something that it had never done before. The train hit its brakes. And the train came to a stop right in front of the church. Well, the boy's curiosity was now really just running away with him. He had to know what was going on today. Why was this train late, first of all? And second of all, why would the train that always rumbles by and doesn't stop suddenly stop right in front of the church? What was going on? His mother, at this point, had stood with the congregation to begin singing their hymns. And the boy stood with the crowd. They sang their hymns. And from that stopped train, out in front of the church, on the tracks, the train that had stopped when it had never stopped before, the late train, from its cars, its cartridges, or the whatever you want to call them that were behind the engine, they were filled with people. People who were being transported somewhere. The boy did not understand people being transported. He didn't know what a concentration camp was. He did not know what the Holocaust was. But he did know this. From those cars were coming voices, and these voices were in distress. They were crying out for help. And hearing the cries of the people in those cars being pulled by the train that had been late that day, that morning, and that had stopped right in front of the church, hearing those groans, hearing those cries for help, the congregation sang a little louder to drown out the noise. because they did not want to admit they heard what they heard. And they couldn't bear to stand to hear it. So they sang a little louder. And when the cries from the cars got louder, because they could hear the singing congregation, the congregation then sang even louder to overcome the louder noise of people crying for help in the cars of the train that had arrived and stopped in front of that church at a time later than it would normally pass. And the boy's curiosity had gotten the best of him, so he left his mother's side. He went down the aisle between the pews. He approached the main door of the church, and he stepped through it. And he walked down that walkway, the yards that it took to get to the gate in the front of the church, at the end of the walkway. And on the other side of that gate was that train sitting there, and a car with wood siding and small spaces between the wood slats on that train. And through those wood slats, the boy could see people. And he could hear them crying, "Help us, please." And a woman on the other side of those wooden slats saw the little boy, and she could see that he was visibly upset over what he saw and what he was experiencing. Why would people be in these cars on a train being transported somewhere? And why would these people be transported in such a manner that they are not in a car with seats and tables and meals? They are in a car that's designed to transport cattle. Why would this be happening in my home of Germany during the early 40s? The boy surely was thinking to himself. And as the congregation sang even louder, the boy approached the car. And the woman, seeing that he was visibly upset, said, "Don't worry, son, it's okay. Don't be fearful. Return to your church. I don't want you to be sad for me." And the boy, not understanding what he was witnessing, not understanding that these people being transported like cattle were on their way to a concentration camp in Nazi Germany, began to cry. He didn't understand. All he knew is that it was not good. It was a bad thing. And about then, the mother, who had been singing loudly with the congregation to drown out the cries of the cattle called people in the boxcar on the train that had stopped in front of the church at a time later than it would normally pass by, she noticed her son was no longer by her side, and she realized the only place he could be was outside, closer to those cries coming from the boxcar being pulled by that train. So she rushed down the corridor as the congregation continued to sing. And she saw the back head of her son at the front gate in front of the church talking to the lady inside the boxcar, and she ran to her son and she swooped him up in her arms. And she caught sight of the people being transported like cattle. And like her son, she began to cry. And then she said nothing more, grabbed her son, went back in the church, and continued to sing as loud as she could so she could drown out the cries, so she could force herself to not admit what was truly going on outside and what was truly going on in her country. The boy grew up to become a man. He remembered the story. And later on, when asked how, as a German citizen, could you allow the concentration camps to happen in your own countryside? And he responded, we didn't know it was happening. We were unaware. The signs were there. The screams were there. The cries out by the people from the boxcar was there. But we didn't know it was going on. We were too busy singing our hymns at church. We were too busy going to work and coming home, playing soccer in the recess yards, and going on with our lives. And even though all the signs were there, and I even looked the woman who was headed to the concentration camp in the eye, we did not know it was happening. We did not realize the seriousness of what was going on in our own country. We were blind to the facts, even though they were in front of us, because it was better and easier and less painful to sing a little louder and look the other way. Are we singing a little louder? We have watched the fraud in the 2020 election, and it is obvious. We are watching big tech censor anybody who disagrees with their Marxist ideology. We have politicians in Washington saying they want to round up and hunt down those who disagree with them politically, and that Mr. Trump should be removed from office in the next 2 weeks. Don't even give it a chance to get to the inauguration. Let's get him out of office now. We've been trying for 4 years, and we were willing to lie, cheat, and steal. And America says, all right, whatever happened, I don't know about it. The train has stopped in front of our church, in front of our culture, in front of our society, in front of us. We have the stopwatch, the pocket watch in our hands. We know what's supposed to be going on, and we know something's wrong. And are we going to then sit there and say, I didn't realize what was going on in 2021 when America became a post-constitutional America for sure. I was too busy. I was occupied. Besides, politics wasn't my thing. I was just singing a little louder to drown it out, hoping it wasn't true. I was singing a little louder because I did not want to admit that America was under assault by the same kind of ideology that brought down Germany, the Soviet Union, Venezuela, Cuba. The list goes on and on. There is an ideology who wants to put you in a boxcar built for cattle, and you're singing a little louder because you don't want to admit it's true. At least I hope it's not you, but somebody is. A lot of people are. Are we going to be that boy sometime in our life later and say, I saw it happen, I saw the signs, but I didn't realize it was happening. I saw America dying, but I didn't do anything about it because I didn't realize that by them forcing me to wear a mask, or by them doing the things they did with the election, that it was an assault on our liberty. Are we going to be that little boy later on and saying to our grandchildren, I'm sorry, I didn't realize your future was being taken away from you, so I did nothing. I just sang a little louder and pretended it wasn't happening and hoped it wouldn't become this. All right, hope you appreciated what I had to say there, and we'll see you next time right here on my YouTube channel. Ciao.